Donuts are one of those recipes that for a long time it was really hard to make raw, and then all of a sudden psyllium husk came onto the scene, and it became much easier to be able to make something nice and fluffy and get that kind of glutinous sort of consistency like you do with cooked food. And this is psyllium husk, but we'll give you a rundown of the ingredients in a minute. So whenever I make these, when I was making them, when I was developing recipes, when I was developing these recipes and I was putting them onto Facebook and stuff, you get so many likes on the donuts. People just want to know how to do it. So we thought this would be a great video to give you in the free series here. So let's give you a rundown of the ingredients here. So we've got water, we've got some cold pressed sesame oil, which I recommend for the donuts just because the one that we get is Clear Spring brand, and it doesn't really have a lot of flavor to it, and that's kind of what you want here. You just want the fat to keep it nice and spongy and nice and moist, but you don't want any kind of flavor from it. So if you can't find an oil that's cold pressed with not much flavor, like sunflower has a lot of flavor, let's say for example, and it's not a very pleasant one. So if you can't find one that's like a cold pressed sesame that doesn't have much flavor, then just go for something like hazelnut or walnut. Those are like nice, pleasant flavors to have in your desserts and stuff. And then we've just got some cashews that have not been soaked. You can soak them if you wish, but you don't need to for this recipe. We have some coconut sugar, and we've got psyllium husk. And this is our first set of ingredients that's going to go into the blender. So the psyllium husk, if you're not familiar with it, it basically binds things, thickens things up. So you'll see it do that when we add it to the blender in the next section when we get into it right now. All right, so let's blend this stuff up. So we'll start with water just to give a good base in the blender of blending up. And the cashews, it's kind of no particular order from there. Oh, and the psyllium husk we're going to save till last, because what happens when you put that in is it thickens things up, and we want this to blend and get really smooth and creamy with the cashews in there before we add that in. So blend this up. All right, now we're going to put the psyllium in, and you'll see it goes from this very loose, like almost nut milk kind of like consistency to it's going to thicken up a fair amount. So we'll pop this in and give it a blend. So it's thickened up ever so slightly, and as it sits here, it's going to thicken up even more. So that's just fine, no problem there. Right, so let's look at our dry ingredients now. So we have coconut flour, we have ground almonds, and we have oat flour for this recipe. And we use the oat flour to keep it nice and light. Obviously, if we used just nuts, it would be really, really heavy. So we're using oat flour, but you can use any kind of grain, like sprouted grain flour, like quinoa if you want to do that, or spelt, or wheat, or barley, whatever you want to use. So we'll get all of our dry ingredients into the bowl. And just give them a gentle mix up just to combine and break down any kind of balls that have formed of one of the ingredients or whatever. Just make sure it's all nicely fine. And then we'll grab our other mixture, which you can see now has gotten kind of jelly-like, quite thick. Pop that in. And it's best to do the wet mixture first because it's good to give it that time to thicken up. It makes the next step faster in most cases. And then just get in there with your hands. Don't mess around with a fork or a spoon or whatever. It's just a lot faster with this mixture to do it with your hands. And make sure you get right to the bottom of the bowl and get any kind of flour that's sticking to the bowl. So what the psyllium is going to do is, as you saw it do in the liquid mixture there, is it's going to set the whole thing up. If you didn't add the psyllium at all, or if you substituted it with like chia or flax, it wouldn't have even remotely the same result. It goes nice and doughy like this. It's quite light and airy. Takes out the heaviness that is normally associated with like raw desserts and stuff. It's kind of a little bit on the thin side at the moment. As we leave it here, it'll start to thicken up a little bit. So let's just give it 1 or 2 minutes and come back to it. So now you can see that it's nice and thick. It's just thickened up ever so slightly, but that's going to be perfect for the consistency that we need. So now we're going to form the donuts. So what I have here is I have a silicone donut mold. which we're going to use. You could use a metal one and then pop it out with a fork or something like that just to kind of get it out. But the nice thing about silicone is that you can pop it out just by pushing the bottom of the mold. So the other thing we have is some jam, which I'll get to in a moment. We'll start with forming them in the silicone mold here. I've just got this guy, which I'm going to need as well. So what we're going to do is dribble a little bit of water into the mold. You wouldn't oil the mold here because it's just going to make oil on the outside of the dough, and that's not what we want. You do want some water nearby so that the dough doesn't stick to your hand as well. Roll it into a loose ball and then just press it in and scrape off the excess. Water is definitely your friend in this situation. So you can kind of smooth it out, take the excess off. And then what I'll do for the first couple is using this ring cutter here, because you see that it has this in the center, so it's not going to have a hole going all the way through, and I want that on some of them. So I'm just going to use this ring cutter just to cut a hole and just take that little bit of dough out. So I'll do one more of those. So just press the dough in, scrape off excess, and you can just smooth it off. Because remember, putting these in the dehydrator, so there's not going to be an oven that like changes the backside, the way it bakes and all the rest of it. So the way it goes in is how it's going to come out looking the same. There we go. Right. So that's those two, and then we just pop them out. There we go. So that's our two donuts that have the holes through the center, and then we'll do a couple where we're going to just fill it with a little bit of the jam here. So I'm going to, again, it's the same process. The only difference is that we're not going to take out the center. So I'll just do one of these. Make it nice and smooth. And then we just pop that out. And you see that it has a bottom to it there. So what we're going to do is clean my grubby hands, and then just going to use that little bit of space to put a little bit of jam in there. So this is the jam we made earlier in this little series. Just fill that in, and it can kind of overflow a little bit with the jam. You can use any flavor you want. This is raspberry. And when it dehydrates, what's going to happen is obviously it's going to dehydrate the moisture, so it's going to kind of flatten a little bit. And then once they're done, we're going to kind of like glaze them in a little bit of like a coconut manna glaze. So you won't even really see that when it's done. So the last thing that we're going to do is just roll some balls. So if you just wanted to do something really quick, you know, you didn't have a mold, you don't want to go out and buy one, you can just do some plain balls that aren't filled with anything. And that's pretty straightforward. And then when they're done, you can just kind of like glaze them if you want to, or you can roll them in powdered xylitol, which makes it look like powdered sugar. And then alternatively, if you want to use jam to fill these guys, what we're going to do is get it kind of flat in your hand. You want a good amount of dough to start because it's a little bit, it'll ooze out otherwise. So kind of make it a little bit flat, like that. Just put a little bit of dough in the middle, jam in the middle of the dough. And we just kind of form the dough around it. Make sure that there's a nice seal on there. Get a little bit of water in your hands. And just roll it into a ball. And then that jam will just be in there as it dehydrates. And then when you cut into it, it'll be a jam-filled donut. And these, again, don't have to be perfect because you can just coat them and glaze them and do whatever you want with them. So I'll finish the rest of these, and then we'll come back and show you the final step. So the donuts have been in the dehydrator for about 10 hours now. It was on a solid tray, a solid Teflon sheet, and I took it off after about 4 hours just to get the bottoms nice and dry as well. So you can see where we put the jam in, and now if you press on it, it's just completely set pretty much, but it's still like a nice bit of like moistness and kind of like gooiness going to be in there when you bite into it. And then we've got the balls here that are just, balls, jam inside. Got a little bit of like a swirl of, you can see the jam came through, but you won't really see that once they're iced. And we're also going to just do a little bit of powdered sugar on some of them, just if you don't want to make the icing or you don't have the ingredients in the house. This is just xylitol, which has been powdered in the Vitamix. So we'll start with the iced ones. We've got some plain donuts here that just have like a hole through the center, as you can see. All right, so we'll just dip the top in. And this has already gotten thicker, this icing, since Russ has made it. And that's it, simple as that. And we'll do that again on these guys. Just dip the top in. Beautiful. So you could sprinkle a little bit of like cacao nibs or something on the top just to give a bit of a color differentiation on there, or even some freeze-dried raspberries if you had those handy. I think we actually have some straws, which will just give you the idea of what it would look like if you could put a little bit of like a nice garnish on there. That looks really nice. There we go. So we'll stop that icing there, I think, and then we'll just use the powdered sugar for the little jam-filled balls. So it's just a matter of popping these into the sugar. You want to make sure, I forgot to mention, that the donuts are at room temperature when you do this, or even a little bit cool, just because if they're not and they're warm, when you put them into the icing, it'll just ooze off because it'll warm the icing up and then it'll just kind of fall right off. So there's our nice powdered donut there. And that's it. You can do them with the whole ones. You can leave them like that. And that's it. You got beautiful donuts.